On January 9th, 1493, as waves crashed against the hull of his ship near the shores of what is now the Dominican Republic, Christopher Columbus caught sight of a figure rising from the sea. A mermaid, or so he believed. But the vision shattered the myth. She was, he wrote, not as beautiful as they are painted, only half as enchanting as the legend had promised. Hi, I'm Jenna, and today I will be sharing with you about the magical and friendly mermaid, or should I say, manatee. Today, I will give you an overview of manatees before talking about their evolution, migration patterns, how they're tracked, risks that endanger manatees, the rehabilitation process, what people can do, and finally, my experience with manatees. I chose this project because I have a deep interest in these creatures. Since I was little, I have loved the ocean. I spent time at the beach, swimming in the water, no matter how cold, and of course, exploring a variety of amazing sea creatures that lived underwater. I took a special interest in manatees because I spend a lot of time in Florida. My grandparents, Barb and Kevin, are snowbirds, meaning they travel south for the warm winters. Almost every year, my family and I would make the trip to Weeki Wachee, where my grandparents stay. At the Crystal River, we would paddle kayaks down the natural spring that discharges clear, warm water into the river. Like my grandparents, manatees also gather in Florida to stay warm during the winter. They swim down the rivers and estuaries of Florida like the Crystal River. It is there that I had my very first encounter with manatees. From then on, I looked forward to our trips to visit Florida. They are part of a reason why I have such an interest in ocean life. Now let's start with some important facts about these gentle giants and why they matter. I'm sure all of you have seen or heard about manatees before. Manatees are also known as sea cows or sea potatoes. These animals are a big attraction in Florida and other parts of the world. However, manatees also serve as a keystone species in their environment. These aquatic mammals are very large, averaging around 10 feet and 1,200 pounds. They eat primarily aquatic vegetation, such as seagrass and various algae. Manatees serve an important role in their ecosystems, consuming around 100 to 200 or 10 to 15% of their body weight daily. Eating such a large amount of aquatic vegetation daily helps control the overgrowth of aquatic plants in waterways. By doing this, they prevent the expansion of invasive species such as the water hyacinth in the Amazon River basin and preserve the well-being of many other species in their habitat. By eating plants and algae that block sunlight, manatees preserve their food sources and that other animals need to survive. Without them, seagrass beds could become overcrowded, reducing their ability to filter water, stabilize shorelines, and provide a habitat for other species. To better understand these gentle giants and why they live today, and how their story fits into Earth's evolutionary timeline, it helps to take each species' unique habitat and history. Both the Florida manatee and the Antillean manatee are subsections of the West Indian manatee. They belong to the order of Sirenia, along with the West African manatee, Amazonian manatee, dugong, which is like a cousin to the manatees almost, very similar. Let's take a look at this map. It shows where different kinds of manatees and their relatives live in the world. Dugongs in the purple are like manatees, but they live in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The Steller sea cow, which is actually extinct now, used to live near Alaska. The West Indian manatee, in blue, lives in Florida, the Caribbean, and parts of Central and South America. The West African manatee lives, you guessed it, along the coasts and rivers of West Africa. And finally, in the yellow area, the Amazonian manatee lives in the freshwater rivers of the Amazon rainforest. So as you can see, manatees and their relatives live all over the world. However, I have focused primarily on the West Indian manatee that lives in Florida. Now, let's play a little trivia. Can any of you guys guess which one of these animals is the closest living relative to a manatee? Elephants, hyraxes, aardvarks, golden moles, tenrecs, or elephant shrews? Any guesses? Yeah, Misha? Anybody else? Yeah, Jen?
The hyrax.
Yeah, and what about over there, Alan? Yeah, so those are all really great guesses. If you guessed elephant or hyrax, you were correct. Both of these animals are the closest living relatives to manatees. However, all of these animals are actually related. This is because all of these animals diverged from the order of Aphrotheria more than 65 million years ago. Manatees are part of the order of Sirenian. Over 35 species have existed over the centuries, but only 4 exist in 2 families today, Trichechidae, which is the manatee, and Dugongidae, which is the dugong. This is a phylogenetic tree of the major branches of Sirenian evolution. A phylogenetic tree is the branching diagram that visually represents an evolutionary relationships between different species, organisms, or genes. This tree in particular was created by Daryl Doming, the world's expert on Sirenian evolution. He analyzed the facial attributes of fossil Sirenians like teeth and jaw to make sense of their relationship. He used facial features because they influence feeding, and the ability to feed is specific to the animals based on their environment. For example, a walrus sucks mollusks out of their shell, while a seal chases and catches its fish, requiring anatomical modifications that are radically different from one another. So, although seals and walruses look similar, their teeth and jaws can be easily analyzed and identified from one another. Another great example is how manatees today replace their teeth in a conveyor belt style because of how quickly they grind down from abrasive seagrass. The stellar sea cow was the manatee's most recent ancestor. It lives in the North Pacific Ocean, and sadly, it went extinct in the 1700s due to overhunting. Contrary to the manatee, however, it had no teeth at all. This was because it fed primarily on soft algae, which did not require to have teeth for chewing. So, as you can see, different climates means different food structures, which in turn means different adaptations, leading to different fossil structures, which we can then use to determine the manatee's lineage. The earliest known Sirenians can be traced back to around 50 million years ago. The earliest Sirenians, perostimids, like Pesosiren portali, wandered around with 4 legs on both in land and in water. By the Oligocene, which was approximately 33.9 to 23 million years ago, Perostomus and Protosirenids had gone extinct. After the Perostomus and Protosirenids, multiple descending creatures evolved throughout different periods of time, such as the Animatherium and the Miosiren. The direct ancestor of the Trichechis is unknown, but from that creature stemmed the subfamily Trichechinae. Next, the Potamosiren first appeared in the middle of the Miocene period, and its descendant, the Rhybodon, lived in the late Miocene and early Pliocene. That was around 5.3 million years ago. Finally, in the Pliocene, which is around 2.6 million years ago, Trichechis, today's modern manatee, had evolved. Now, understanding the migratory behaviors of modern manatees is important to understanding their survival. Manatees are semi-social creatures, meaning they only gather together during winter in Florida's estuaries and rivers. Although manatees can usually be found along the coast of South Carolina, Florida, and Alabama during the summer, they can also travel as far north as Virginia and as far west as Texas. Manatees must continue returning to warm water locations and teaching their young how to migrate to avoid traveling too far from warm water and not returning by winter. Sometimes, manatees wander further than expected. For example, in 1994, Chessie the manatee traveled to Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Chessie was spotted there first in July. Although manatees travel relatively far outside of Florida, finding them as far as Maryland is very unusual. As the winter months came, when manatees were supposed to be migrating to the warm waters of Florida, Chessie stayed in the bay. Scientists and experts soon grew anxious as Chessie showed no signs of heading south. As such, a collaborative team of local aquariums in both Florida and Maryland worked together to transport Chessie back to Florida. Chessie was then tagged for tracking and released back into the wild. Researchers use tagging and tracking to answer important research questions and locate specific manatees. Manatee tagging gear consists of a padded belt on the peduncle, a flexible tether, a floating radio tag. The tether has a safety feature called the weak link, designed to break if it gets tangled. During the winter, tags also include a temperature monitor to gather information on different water temperatures that the manatee experiences. Researchers can download the information gathered from the trackers and monitor the manatees from remote distances. It is important to note that trackers very closely resemble buoys, and boaters often see manatees tangled in buoys, in which case they should alert Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation and not try to cut them off themselves. However, tracking is an expensive and necessary process for both the researchers and released manatees. So it is essential to be able to spot the difference between the two. Manatees are vulnerable due to human impacts and other environmental factors, such as boat strikes and deteriorating water quality. How did we get to this point? To see the full picture, let's take a closer look at the environments manatees depend on and how human activities may have changed them. Manatees inhabit Florida's rivers, bays, canals, estuaries, and coastal areas year-round, moving freely between fresh, saline, salt, and brackish water. In the winter, they need to be in an aquarium warm water site, or not an aquarium, they need to be in a warm water site, such as a natural spring or by a power plant. As human activity has increased on the shores of manatee habitats, so has the amount of boating activity. About 25% of yearly mortality rates of manatees result from collisions with watercraft. Most collisions result from high-speed boats in murky, shallow water that hide the manatee from view. Sadly, only around 4% of adult manatees are left unmarred by boats, and most are likely to be hit multiple times in their lives. In March, warning, the following image is a little graphic. That was kind of supposed to go before I show the image. Sorry about that, but it is a little graphic, so look away if you don't want to see it. In March 2022, a manatee named Reckless and her calf Churro were found injured due to a boat strike and taken into rehabilitation. Over a year later, they were released back into the wild. Churro was fitted with a tracker since he was nearing the age of independence, but had limited experience in the wild, and they were both successfully released. The state of Florida has established regulatory speed zones to protect manatees and their habitat. These zones are located where manatees live or travel regularly or seasonally. If someone accidentally hits a manatee, they should report it, as there are no fines for these kinds of accidents. But calling Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission will help ensure that manatees' injuries are cared for. Throughout Florida, floodgates protect waterfront buildings and properties from floods. Floodgates work by raising or lowering based on the amount of water. If there is an excessive amount of water, for example, in the event of a flood, floodgates would topple forward, allowing water to be released at a controlled pace. Sadly, manatees occasionally get trapped under these floodgates and are crushed and killed by the pressure. Plastic pollution caused by humans is also a big problem in Florida, with roughly 7,000 tons of plastic entering Florida's marine environment in 2020. Like every other sea mammal, manatees are very affected by litter. When swimming, pieces of rope and crab cages or loose buoys can often end up wrapped around the manatees' fins or bodies. As they grow, this can become a problem, cutting off circulation through limbs and affecting their chances at survival. Another danger of plastic pollution is that it ends up in a manatee's digestive system. Manatees can inhale trash, often containing plastics littered by humans, after it floats into seagrass beds that they eat. Since plastic takes around 450 years to decompose, anything that winds up in a manatee's intestines will not go anywhere, leading to its death. Although manatees have no natural predators, they still face some environmental impacts that can endanger their survival. Cold stress brings many manatees into critical care and rehabilitation. Contrary to what people think, manatees have very little fat on their bodies. They cannot tolerate temperatures under 20 degrees Celsius for extended periods of time because they cannot produce enough metabolic heat. Often, manatees will be found in cold water areas that aren't sufficient to their body temperature, causing cold stress as their body tries to keep its core organs warm, drawing heat away from its limbs. This is similar to hypothermia in humans. This also results in what we would consider frostbite, where manatees can experience the bleaching of skin and the loss of small parts of limbs. This also weakens their immune system, making them more susceptible to infections and lesions that can lead to algae growth and barnacles because they thrive in cuts. Cold stress can also be fatal, and manatees with this condition should be immediately brought in for care. Red tide is another thing that can be a significant and reoccurring hazard that impacts manatees. Red tide is a naturally occurring marine plankton. Although it is known to most as red tide, scientists prefer harmful algae blooms, or HABs. HABs occurs when colonies of algae bloom out of control while producing multiple types of harmful neurotoxins, such as brevetoxins, which can have severe impacts on manatees when inhaled or ingested, such as seizures and death. Red tide also occurs here along the coast of BC, contaminating our mussels and clams and making it unsafe for swimming and eating shellfish. If a manatee is suffering from exposure to HABs, common symptoms may be facial twitching, lethargy, swimming sideways in the water, or an inability to surface and breathe. Additionally, if a manatee is exposed to red tide, it may be more susceptible to diseases and should immediately be brought into critical care. Another common cause of rehabilitation for manatees is mother-calf separation. Mothers play an important role in their calves' lives for the first 1 to 2.5 years. They teach their young how to migrate to warm water sites in the winter and how to find food. Their separation is often caused by boat strikes that leave the mother unable to care for the calf, recreational interference caused by human interaction, which may separate the mother and calf if one decides to swim away, strong currents or weather factors that may leave a manatee stranded, or an independent calf that loses track of its mother. A young manatee who has not yet learned the necessary skills to thrive will likely die without mother or human interaction. Because young manatees rely so heavily on their mother for protection, both adults and calves are critical for protection. That is why legal protections come in. Today, there are many laws around manatee protection, especially in Florida. Manatee researchers and caretakers prioritize keeping manatees safe and wild. In 1893, the first laws were passed protecting Florida's manatees, and it was called the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act, making it illegal to harass, hunt, capture, or kill any marine mammal, including manatees, which are the state animal of Florida. In the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, the Endangered Species Act of 1973, and the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act of 1978 make it illegal to harass, hunt, capture, or kill any marine mammal, including manatees. Anything that disrupts the manatee's normal behavior is a violation, punishable under federal law by up to a $50,000 fine, 1 year imprisonment, or both. The laws put in place to protect manatees in the Dominican Republic are similar because they both fall under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. In places like Haiti and Nigeria, there are no laws whatsoever around the protection of manatees. Although a very small number of manatees exist in Haiti, they were historically abundant, and due to overhunting, which persists today, their population is rapidly declining. In Nigeria, over the last 5 years, over 100 manatees have been killed for their meat, as shown in this picture. In the Amazon River Basin, home to the Amazon River manatee, rules regarding manatee protection are scarcely enforced. Because of this, manatees are kept frequently for their meat and skin and oil, and they're also commonly kept as personal pets in pools, which is also, in almost all cases, results in death. After a manatee is recovered from a dangerous situation, it needs to be rehabilitated. Rehabilitation can be a long or short process, depending on the circumstances. Manatees must meet specific standards in order to be released back into the wild. Manatees undergoing rehabilitation are evaluated and placed into one of the following 3 categories. A releasable manatee has been successfully cleared by its current veterinarian, is of appropriate size and weight, demonstrates appropriate behaviors, and shows the necessary skills to survive in the wild. Most manatees in this category are non-injured manatees that have gotten tangled, ingested, or trapped in fishing gear. Successfully releasable manatees have also been trapped between man-made structures, isolated by high water, or injured by watercraft. Additionally, orphaned and red tide manatees can be released back into the wild. Other cases may be seasonally disoriented manatees who fail to migrate properly and must be released in similar temperatures to when rescued. In contrast to fully releasable manatees, some individuals do not yet meet the criteria for safe release and are placed in an intermediate category. Manatees that are deemed conditionally releasable, if their ability to survive wildly is questioned. This often includes manatees undergoing treatment, born in captivity, or held for longer periods of time. This status often changes to releasable if a manatee's condition improves, and it may also change to non-releasable if the manatee's condition worsens or does not improve. When a manatee faces more serious or permanent conditions, it may be placed in a different category entirely. Conditionally non-releasable manatees cannot currently be released into the wild because their condition threatens their well-being and the wild population's well-being. Additionally, their condition may affect their ability to reproduce. This category often includes manatees affected by disease or significant injuries such as paddle loss or spinal trauma. A manatee that is not releasable will often be transported to an aquarium where it continues to live its life out peacefully. If a manatee is going to be released, it has to undergo multiple assessments to ensure it is set up to survive in the wild properly. Animal caretakers will follow the following assessments. The developmental assessment focuses on the manatee's ability to grow to an appropriate size and feed itself as it would on its own in the wild. The developmental assessment focuses on the manatee's ability to grow to an appropriate size and feed itself as it would when it's on its own in the wild. Releasable manatees should be slowly weaned off supplemental nutrition, be bigger than 200 centimeters in length, and weigh more than 600 pounds at 2 years of age. Conditionally releasable manatees are individuals that may or may not show nutritional independence and may or may not meet the minimum requirement for length and weight. Manatees in this category have a medical condition or physical injury. The behavioral assessment ensures that manatees can perform normal manatee behaviors in the wild, such as breathe, swim, forage, dive, surface, and avoid dehydration. Manatees that do not exhibit these skills may be deemed conditionally releasable or conditionally not releasable. To complete the evaluation, a veterinarian must confirm the manatee's medical stability. A veterinarian experienced in manatee care conducts a medical assessment and determines if the manatee is medically cleared. Being medically cleared means that the manatee has no problems limiting its future survival ability in the wild. Beyond rehabilitation, protecting manatees in the wild requires everyday efforts from people living near their habitats. Preventing injury can often include actions creating lots of space in waterways for manatees to swim safely, slowing down your boat to give manatees time to swim elsewhere, and reporting unusual sightings to a call line such as FWC or Clearwater Marine Aquarium, which is shown here. Additionally, reducing the use of fertilizers that cause algae growth in rivers benefit manatees. You can also respect the laws around manatees to keep them wild and protect their natural habitat. Some smaller solutions include wearing polarized sunglasses when boating to see under the water's glare, and looking for the distinct patterns of manatee tails in the water. Finally, picking up debris and monofilament lines in designated disposal areas will help save manatees and other animals from becoming entrapped. People must do their part to help prevent the decline of an essential keystone species like manatees. Inspired to learn more, my mom and I set out to find the incredible people working on a project to protect manatees firsthand. In January 2025, my mom and I traveled to Florida to visit different manatee care centers. First, Tanya Ward from the Clearwater Marine Aquarium and Research Institute gave us an amazing tour of their manatee care facilities, which had just opened in August. Tanya explained that their facilities are second stage, and the manatees living there are healthy and no longer need of critical care, meaning they're putting on weight to be released back into the wild. On July 30th, 2 manatees, Yeti and Zamboni, were transported from Zoo Tampa to Clearwater Marine Aquarium. Both were being treated for cold stress and were brought to Clearwater Marine Aquarium to finish their rehabilitation. Both have now been released into the wild without needing to be tagged for tracking. Sadly, the aquarium was flooded with 4 feet of water during Hurricane Helen. They also lost their power, and the flooding damaged important equipment such as their water filtration system. Both manatees were relocated back to Zoo Tampa. Tanya also connected us with, Clearwater Marine Aquarium and Research Center has an amazing research institute that intends on making advancements towards protecting species and habitats. The Research Institute uses satellite tagging, aerial photo identification, and other tools to collect scientific data to help ensure the survival of wild manatees worldwide. Tanya also connected us with Jamie Vaccaro, the curator at the Florida Mammal Marine Department at Zoo Tampa, as well as Lisa Jenna, the supervisor, and Megan from public relations. Megan showed us the Manatee Hospital, where we then got a fantastic tour of the zoo from Lisa. Zoo Tampa is a critical care hospital that rescues and rehabilitates manatees in any condition affecting their survival. Lastly, we went to Moat Marine Aquarium and Laboratory, where Amber Hirschberger, the volunteer coordinator at Moat, showed us around. Moat was housing 2 manatees, Lou and Buffett. Lou had lost a large chunk of his tail in a boat strike accident, and Buffett was born and raised in captivity alongside his brother Hugh, who sadly died from injuries sustained after an unfortunate encounter with Buffett. Both manatees will never be released back into the wild due to their circumstance and will instead live together at Moat. Unlike Zoo Tampa and Clearwater Marine Aquarium, Moat does not need to limit the manatee's human interactions as much as would be necessary if the animal were likely to be released. Instead, they can use target training that teaches the manatees routines that make tasks such as feeding easier. Target training can also be used to entertain aquarium guests. This manatee here is picking which team it thinks will win the Super Bowl. Moat also conducts a wide variety of research led by MRP scientists. An interesting example of a current research project is the low altitude surveys, which Moat has been conducting for more than 25 years. These surveys can help count manatees and other wildlife by analyzing the survey data and producing cartographic documentation of manatees' distribution, as well as habitat patterns and trends in population. Moat also conducts a lot of other research, such as photo identification surveys, by assessing the scars and other injuries, which provides an abundant amount of information on manatees' behavior and ecology, habitat use, life, history, and more. Which is what this person is doing here, marking its scars. You can take photos of it. My mom and I also got the opportunity to visit the Manatee Viewing Center across from the Big Bend Power Station at Apollo Beach. This power plant circulates warm water from Tampa Bay for cooling and then sends it discharging back out into the bay, creating a warm water sanctuary that happens to be the perfect temperature for manatees in the winter. The manatee viewing area also happens to be an ideal location for manatee releases. When I visited, I was lucky enough to see 2 manatees get released back into the Big Bend Canal. The first manatee was originally rescued for cold stress in North Carolina, but was known to be sighted around the canal area, and that's why they released him there. The second manatee was an older juvenile rescued in St. Pete, who was also familiar with the area. To end our trip, my mom and I visited the Crystal River. In the winter, the river is home to hundreds of manatees because of the warm freshwater spring that runs directly into it. We kayaked down the river, which was very shallow at some points, and when we reached the spring, I tied my kayak onto the shore and swam with the manatees. Swimming with manatees is always an incredible experience because they are gentle and sweet. However, there are a few important rules to remember when swimming with manatees. The first rule is to always stay floating on the very surface of the water to prevent accidentally kicking a manatee or stirring up the muddy sand on the bottom, as this person is doing here. Rule number 2 is to always stay calm. Manatees are very relaxed creatures, but can still get stressed if you're flailing your arms to escape them. Lastly, no one is allowed to touch manatees, as the people in this photo are doing. Manatees are very curious creatures and they love to swim up to you and follow you around. However, the more comfortable manatees get with humans, the more they may rely on humans or swim up to moving boats, which we obviously want to avoid. Unfortunately, many people touring the Crystal Rivers disregard these rules for their own enjoyment. This is why volunteers such as this guy named Steve that we met on the water sit in kayaks all along the Crystal River all day to make sure everyone follows these rules. The thing that always surprises me most when I visit the Crystal River is the boats that constantly pass directly next to the springs. Tour boats push kayakers out of the way to send large groups of people into the water without knowing how to respect the laws that protect manatees' natural behavior. However, despite this, many tour guides and locals still do their best to educate their guests on respectful practices around manatee tourism to ensure the safety of their animals. I did some videoing on my trip of the manatees when I was swimming. Let's just say I'm not exactly the best video taker, so it's all a little not great, and if you find yourself wanting me to turn the camera, like, I think that too, but I'm gonna show you anyway because it was a really fun experience. So, and also it has Bridgerton in the background, so that's, yeah. It's also kind of loud. Yeah. Sorry about the sound that blasted me out of existence. That was really loud, so I apologize for that. So anyway, connecting with the people who are part of the manatee conservation efforts in Florida gave me a better appreciation for this species. It made me realize to the extent which people go to protect manatees, and the knowledge I have gained from the internet does not compare to what I learned firsthand on my tours. I am so glad I connected with the manatee conservation efforts in a new way, and I hope to see even more exciting progress on my next visit to Florida. So, in summary, manatees are a vital part of Florida's coastal well-being. Also, aside from preventing the overgrowth of invasive species, manatees are also their own advocates. They help promote ecotourism, a form of conscious traveling that prioritizes respecting nature and minimizing their natural impact. Nearly 70,000 tourists flock to Florida each year to visit manatees in Crystal River. People get to experience and enjoy the manatee's natural habitat while learning about the problems that manatees face. Through tourism companies like the Crystal River Kayak Company, which is what we always use when we go down the Crystal River, people experience the magic of swimming with manatees in humane fashion that keep manatees safe. Throughout my Masterworks process, I not only gained extensive knowledge about the problems that manatees face every day, but also how much effort people like Tanya Ward, Jamie Vaccaro, Lisa DeGeno, and Amber Hirschberger put into preserving this species' well-being. The efforts of conservationists, scientists, researchers, animal caretakers, and volunteers who better the future of manatees and the rest of Florida's marine habitat are very admirable, and I am incredibly grateful that I had the opportunity to be able to witness all of the energy put into securing the animal's safety. While manatees may seem relatively niche to people living outside of such close coastal habitats like Florida and the Amazon River Basin, their well-being is just as important as the well-being of a dolphin or a shark. Their ecosystems depend on them as a keystone species, and they bring joy to so many people's lives. Their peaceful demeanor is unique to their species, and there is no creature like them in the world. Losing them to the carelessness of humanity would be a great loss. No matter where you are, you can still make a difference in the conservation of manatees by supporting zoos, research centers, and nonprofits such as Zoo Tampa, Clearwater Aquarium, Moat Marine Laboratory, and Aquarium, and Save the Manatee Club. I am grateful to understand the importance of these creatures, and I hope that others can too connect with such a gentle animal and be inspired to save their wild status. Now, before we finish, I'd just like to say my thank yous. Thank you to my mom for taking me all the way to Florida to see manatees and sharing all of your genius ideas with me. Thank you to my dad for staying up late with me to help me finish my slideshow. And thank you to both of you for supporting me throughout this entire process. Thank you to my genius brother, who tried to explain best how the matrix works in 15 minutes so that I could then explain how Daryl Doming makes a phylogenetic tree. Thank you to Piper for being a wonderful sister, even though you didn't actually help me very much. Thank you to Lisa DeGeno and Amber Hirschberger. You both gave me incredible tours, and I am so grateful to you for coordinating and taking the time with me to the opportunity to visit your facilities. Thank you to Carly Floyd for meeting with me during the earliest phase of this project when I needed the help the most. Thank you to Tanya Ward for sharing your extensive knowledge on manatees with me and for taking the time out of your day to give me a wonderful tour of Clearwater Marine Aquarium and for becoming such an incredible second advisor on such short notice. You were so inspiring to me and an incredible role model. Thank you to Nina Rusta for helping me edit my paper and presentations throughout the entire year and tutoring me for 5 years. Your teaching was the only thing that kept me in the grade appropriate to my age during COVID, and I'm so glad to have you as the third advisor. Thank you so much to Carrie and Marinette for being such an incredible advisor and an amazing teacher. I never would have imagined that I would get this far when I was sitting on the circle on the floor on the green room in grade 6 talking about what we would do for our Masterworks, and I couldn't have asked for a more amazing advisor. I wouldn't change a thing if I had to do this again. And lastly, thank you to Jen. You're not only an amazing teacher, but also an amazing person. You care so much about your students and you comfort us when we're sad and you make us feel heard. You're so funny and kind and you make everyone's day brighter. And I couldn't have asked for a better teacher to end my grade 9 year experience. I'm so grateful for all of you to make my 4th year so wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. That's the end.
Stay here and drink some water.
Okay. Should I sit down?
Incredible presentation, Miss White. And we are going to have a question and answer time. So you're going to bring us more knowledge than you already have. It's been an incredible journey. To your advisors first.
Thanks, Jenna. That was Miss White, sorry. That was fabulous. I'm so proud of you, and I hope you feel really proud of yourself too. It's been a long journey, but thinking about it in grade 6 all the way until now, but like you did it, and it was amazing. So professional. Your confidence in speaking. You're a fabulous presenter. I have a variety of questions from myself and from some of your advisors who couldn't be here because they're in Florida or the Dominican Republic. So the question for me is, how is climate change affecting manatees?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So first thing I'd like to say is that the change in temperature leading to warmer weathers in Florida often is causing a problem where manatees don't know when to migrate back to the coastal estuaries of Florida, and then all of a sudden, the weather changes and it becomes cold, and manatees are then, kind of stuck outside of Florida area and are then subjected to cold stress and seasonal disorientation and stuff like that. And then additionally, another problem caused by not necessarily climate change, but also climate change and human problems is runoff from farms. So the fertilizers, which I mentioned previously, used in farms will run off into the water, which causes serious algae blooms that block the sunlight from reaching the plants that that manatees need to survive. And this actually happened once before pretty badly. It was the manatee mortality event in 2021, which caused over 840 manatee deaths in Florida. So that was a big problem, and people were working really hard to bring seagrass to manatees to prevent their deaths.
Oh, thank you for sharing about that. I have a couple of questions from Tanya, your advisor in Florida. Her first question is, what was your favorite part of your manatee adventure while here in Florida, most recently?
Yeah, well, of course, obviously visiting the Clearwater Aquarium. That was so fun. It was such an incredible experience. And visiting every place that I went to was actually I never have experienced anything like that in my life. It was incredible. And then I also found, specifically watching the manatees get released into the river incredibly interesting, because that's just something you don't see every day. It's something you see on nature documentaries. It's something you see on zoo documentaries. But to be there and actually witness what they do to help to prepare manatees for the wild is really interesting. Seeing them put the trackers on, seeing them measure them and mark their scars and take pictures. It was incredible to watch, and it gave me so many questions that better helped my Masterworks presentation become more detailed and interesting.
Great. And then she had another question too. So if you could be any animal on planet Earth, would you be a manatee or would you be something else?
Manatees are pretty great. Because they have no natural predators, which I thought was really interesting. They can interact with alligators and sharks and like they're fine, they're chill. But if I could be any animal, I would either be a dolphin because they're super intelligent and they seem like they have a lot of fun, or I would be a orca because not only are they a top predator, but they're also one of the smartest animals on the earth and super intelligent, and in some parts of their brain have like a higher comprehension for like emotion and empathy than humans do, and I think that's really incredible. And they can recognize themselves in mirrors too, which is super interesting because not a lot of animals can do that. So I'd like to be able to recognize myself in a mirror, so that'd be...
You can't do that currently. And last question, was there one fact that you learned about manatees that fascinated you the most?
One fact that I thought was really interesting, there were so many, it's really hard to decide. One interesting one that I didn't really mention because I didn't really go into the anatomy of a manatee, but one thing was that they actually have prehensile lips. So similar to, you know, how like an elephant like can use its nose, a manatee has two sections of its lips, one on this side and it has the same thing on the other side, that it can use separately, individually, to put food into its mouth. And I thought that was super, super incredible. So that was definitely another thing that I thought was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Great answers to questions. I have a question for you. I was also pretty excited to see that phylogenetic tree there, as I studied it in university, phylogenetic trees, and that was a big part of it. They're hard to figure out and hard to know how they're made. So I thought you did an excellent job explaining that, even though it was tricky.
Yes, it was. I spent a lot of time on that.
My question for you is, the Steller sea cow did not have teeth.
No, it did not.
Because it ate algae.
Yes.
So, question, with the algal blooms, do the manatees that are in Florida, do they have any adaptations to eat the algae that their predecessors had?
Yeah, actually manatees do commonly eat the algae, but in cases where it's like red tide, when the algae blooms are harmful, this leads to like the algae getting into their system, which is what partially what like impacts them so greatly. So they do actually eat a lot of algae. From what I hear, like they eat almost any plant, honestly. Like they eat like any form of aquatic vegetation, even though it's mainly seagrass. So they do eat algae, and that's why it's such a big problem.
And with an algal bloom, there's too much algae.
Yes.
Okay,
correct.
Gotcha. Questions from the floor?
I think that was a really incredible project, and you went really deep into that and made it very interesting to listen to. And my question is, I noticed that the tails on manatees are more rounded than like dolphins or whales, and you said you didn't go into the anatomy, but do you know why that is?
Yeah, so if you noticed, the dugong has a tail more similar to a dolphin. It's like a, one of those things, and similar to the Steller sea cow as well. So it's just part of their, like evolution, where the tail just slowly changed into a more rounded shape, I assume. Yeah, honestly, I couldn't give you an exact reason for why that happened, but as they evolved, you can see, I didn't show a lot of pictures, but as you can evolve, you see their ancestors, the tail slowly forms from a tail into a more fish-like tail, and then slowly into a manatee tail. So, evolved from a creature that was more of it had 4 legs, it had a tail, and then slowly that tail evolved into the shape it is today. So, yeah.
That was a really great presentation, and if you were to continue on with what you're doing right now into a career, what would you do? Would you make an organization or something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely want to probably do some more work with manatees and other marine mammals after, throughout college and afterwards. Something I want to do during college is an internship at one of the places that I visited, Clearwater Marine Aquarium or something like that, because they offer a lot of that kind of thing. And then when I grow up and I maybe do something related to marine biology, I do want to do a lot of either the research on manatee tracking and like manatee migration patterns and like just like everything manatee, and also maybe some of the rehabilitation like, you know, like Lisa Jenna does at the critical care hospital at Tampa Zoo. Yeah.
Great presentation. If you could have a lot more time on this project, what would you research and why?
Definitely the anatomy of a manatee. I was reading this book called The Florida Manatee Book, and that's where I got a lot of my information from. And it had so much on the anatomy of a manatee, and that's all I want to talk about, but I didn't because it just wasn't part of the time frame. So I didn't talk about it. That's definitely something I would talk about. And then also going into further detail about migration and like what factors affect migration patterns and stuff like that would also be a really cool expansion of my Masterworks project.
Sounds like a master's dissertation, actually.
Thank you, Ms. White. I think well, we know you as one of the champion of causes at the school. You're standing behind really important issues. So I think the world of, let's call it marine mammal preservation or something, will be lucky to have you out there when you get to college and so forth. I think one of the things you bring to that, and to pick up on something Jen said, is this ability to explain complex ideas in a way that everybody can approach. You had some great examples. You had, what's that tree called? Phylogenetic tree. You had this lovely example of how, like, I was trying to follow along, and then you showed me the seal and the walrus and explained that. You made some things really clear, so thank you. I think that's going to be something that everybody will benefit from. So kind of along that line, I'm wondering, I remember that, what did you call it, the big mortality, you call it the
Manatee mortality.
in 21 or something like that? I remember that. And now you've been talking about all this work that people are doing, sort of building awareness. Do you think it's making progress? Like, you know, humans are running into their environment in sometimes ways, and we seem to be waking up. Should we feel optimistic about where we can go?
Yeah, I do. I do think there's you hear a lot about the bad news, but when I actually went to Florida and I visited all the places, like there's so many people trying to solve the problem. It's incredible. And so that was really an impressive thing to see. And as well, like part of the reason why I chose manatees instead of, you know, something that you could see here like a whale or an orca is because I didn't want you to feel disconnected from the problem because you don't live near the problem, because a manatee really is so important to their environment. And just because, you know, a manatee doesn't live here and a manatee doesn't live in California, a manatee is still important, and without it, that environment that so many people love to visit would be lost. So.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being the person that shows us we can make a difference, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. You gave us such an education today, and I feel like I'm a fan of manatees now. One thing I was noticing about your photos, it looked like actual lettuce, like lettuce that humans eat,
Yes.
was floating in the water. That made me wonder, what in rehabilitation are the people feeding the manatees, considering the quantity of food they need every day?
Yeah, so when I was in Florida, I was actually asking about that to Lisa, and she told me that manatees are one of the most expensive animals to keep in rehabilitation because you have to feed them so much food. So I think it's usually typically lettuce, because lettuce or seagrass that they harvest. And my other advisor, Carly, she used to do diving for seagrass, I believe, to help feed the manatees in the aquariums, which I think is really cool. And then also manatees that are orphaned maybe or are too young would be fed like a milk supplement, which I also got to see there, which was really cool. And so yeah, all of those things are typically what they're fed in an aquarium. That's probably why you saw lettuce in the photos, is because it was from an aquarium. Yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. White. The manatees have been a mystery my entire life, so thank you for that. In one of the slides, you showed the pictures of yourself at the center, and you were sort of, one was just you and the manatee, and like, what were you doing? Like, they're laying there in the center. What do you do to help them? What were you doing? Are you scrubbing them?
That wasn't me. That wasn't me. That was one of the women who worked there. Yes, it was very cool to watch, but something really cool about the critical care center there is that their floors, they're wooden planks, and they raise and lower so that the manatee you don't have to like transport manatee because manatees are heavy, right? And so the women there were feeding it, I believe, like supplemental nutrition, and they actually do that because like through its nose, because its nose, as you might have seen, I don't know if I can find it, but in previous photos, the manatee has those 2 nostrils, and so when feeding it like a supplement, like that woman was doing in the previous photo, she used the tube and she fed it like through its nose, is what I believe is happening there.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. White, I think we need to, okay, one more from the grade 9s. Ms. Cook?
Thank you. Amazing job, Miss White. My question is, do manatees ever interact with dolphins or other sea creatures in the wild?
Yeah, so they do often interact with sea creatures in the wild. I mean, not often, but like, because they have no natural predators, they're not really afraid of anything, which could be a good thing or bad thing, because they don't run from anything, which they probably should sometimes. But yeah, they're really friendly with alligators that live in the areas around them. So sometimes when you're in the kayak, you'll see like an alligator go by, and manatees just don't really care. So that was really cool. And also, there's an invasive species of fish, which is called the armored catfish. And it's recently become invasive to Florida waters, and it also follows the manatees around a lot. I don't know if you'd count that as an interaction, but it tries to eat the seagrass off a manatee's back, which is very frustrating for the manatee and can result in like a lack of sleep and stuff like that for them, which we all need sleep, so, yeah, anyway, yeah.
Ms. White, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
That was a really good, that was a really good presentation, Miss White. My question is, what is the most common injury sustained from like boat injuries?
Yeah, so the most common injury would probably be cuts, obviously, but there's also an injury that happens when the hull of a vessel hits the manatee, because they're in, like, manatees only live in around like 6 foot deep water, and they're slow, so they can't really swim away. So the most like damaging injuries often happen when the manatee is hit with the hull of the boat, because a manatee's lungs and its ribs are all along the back of the manatee. And so when a manatee's coming up to breathe or swimming at the top of the water and a boat hits it, the hull of the vessel can break its ribs, which can then puncture its lungs, which can allow the lungs to fill with water or air. That leads to the manatee not be able to swim properly, to not be able to breathe properly, to like not be able to float properly, because their lungs are their main source of buoyancy control. So, like sinking too much or floating excessively. And that is something that takes extensive care in a rehabilitation center. So it's something we definitely want to avoid.